Hey guys, welcome back to another 3D printing video. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at two artillery 3D printers, the Sidewinder X1 and the newer little brother, the Genius. Alright, well hopefully you enjoyed this video. Let's get started. Alright, so I've had the Sidewinder for a little while and definitely been enjoying it, but Artillery came out with the new printer, which is the Genius, and not too surprisingly, they're both quite identical and have a lot of the same features and mostly just distinguish between their sizes. And so you can see here how much larger the X1 is compared to the Genius. Alright, so let's start from the top. We're looking at the Sidewinder. So we have a spool holder with bearings, and we can see the filament detector. Going to the Genius, we have pretty much the same kind of spool holder and the same kind of detector also. Now, the only difference between the spool holder on the Genius is that one of the sides are adjustable back and forth, where the Sidewinder is also adjustable, but it's a lot harder. But I don't find myself adjusting these too much once I set them up for my filament. So the next thing we notice that's quite obvious is the top brace on the Sidewinder is an aluminum extrusion, while on the Genius we have a injected molded plastic that goes from one end to the other, and that is the brace. So that's definitely a different approach, and we have a huge Genius logo there up front. So the Sidewinder has metal end caps where there's bearings and the Z-rod goes through that, while the Genius is all plastic in the back also. So as we go down, we can see the Genius has aluminum extrusions going down, and the Sidewinder has the same kind of profiles. They're just much longer. So here on the Genius, we have a nice little ribbon cable that goes on the profile and goes down. And then there's a junction box in here, and this is all covered in this plastic mold here. Now the Sidewinder is very similar, where it has the same ribbon cable that kind of tucks behind and goes down. But as you can see on mine, all of this junction part is open, and we can really see how it connects here and distributes. So there's another ribbon cable that comes out of here and runs to the hot end. So here on the Genius, it's pretty much the same thing, and it runs to the hot end assembly. Now, speaking about the hot end assembly, they actually look exactly identical. Now, there is a cap on this one, and it's injected molded. It's a pretty nice looking cap. On the Sidewinder, there is no cap, and the reason there's no cap is because I took it off because it was extremely unpleasant to look at. It was a 3D printed and very rough looking. So I much preferred the open look, and I just left it like that. But as far as the mechanisms go and the way the hot end is assembled, they appear to be exactly the same. So we have the Titan extruder here that's geared, a heat break fan with the heatsink, and then our radial cooling fan. Now on my Sidewinder, cooling fan duct here is actually 3D printed, and I'm not sure, it's maybe because I have the earlier version, but on the Genius, injected molded and very nice. So the Genius is a little bit more polished looking because they've had more time to kind of refine it. And so as far as the beds go, they have the same material, which is ultra base style, where it has little dimples, and when they heat up, they stick the filament very well. And then as it cools, it pops right off. So it works great. And both beds have the same technology. The only difference I've noticed on the Genius, it seems to be more matte and seems to stick a little better than on the Sidewinder, where you can see it's more shiny. It still works great, but I think the Genius has a little bit of updated surface where it actually sticks a little better. And if we go below, we can see that there is an AC heating pad, that's the orange, and then we got insulation underneath that. Same thing on the Sidewinder, except everything is much larger. Looks like we have the same bed frame with the same knobs. But the big difference is there's 4 rollers on the Genius and there's 6 rollers on the Sidewinder. Another large difference is that the Genius has a small profile that the bed rides on, and the Sidewinder has the much larger frame profile to give it more stability for this large bed. I also forgot to mention kind of the highlight of this printer, which is this very huge aluminum profile here that the hot end assembly rides on, which the Genius incorporated also, and it really looks beefy, especially on the Genius because it's a smaller printer. So both printers use the optical sensors. They both have the same screens, which are touch screens, and they work great. And the Genius actually has a little reset button here, which the Sidewinder appears not to have one at all. They both support USB thumb drives and micro SD cards. They both have the USB printer cable input on the side here. And if you guys can see, this is the Genius. The profiles are very similar. So the base is the same height on both, which makes the Sidewinder look very slim and slender, and the Genius here looks a little bit more chunky. Alright, so now I got the printers flipped around to their backside. Let's take a closer look at the differences. So right off the bat, guys, you can see how much larger the Sidewinder is. So here on the Sidewinder, we can see the way the spool holder is mounted is on these 4 bolts here. And you have to loosen both of those bolts to move around either one. Now the way the Genius is made is actually a lot more clever, and I think this is probably one of the reasons why they use this plastic brace here, is because they designed kind of like this little knob here that you just unscrew, and then you can move this back and forth as much as you need to adjust it to your spool, and then you just tighten it and you're good. Now one of the cool things about artillery printers is they have this belt here in between of the 2 leads that are coupled together, and the Sidewinder has the same design here, which is really good because it couples both of the motors together on the top, so you never have an issue with one motor, you know, trying to push harder than the other. They're synchronized together, so they kind of work together. So as we go down, we can see the Genius here has these caps here that completely enclose the coasters or the wheels that ride on the channel. Now the big downside to that is that there's no way to get to them to adjust them. But if you did needed to adjust them, you would have to do some disassembling to even get to them, which is quite different here on the Sidewinder because everything is open and you can see it. It looks more simple, but I would rather have it this way because maintaining the printer. So another big difference is on the Sidewinder, everything is metal here, and then we have this plastic little coupler here that holds the brass fitting. On the Genius, everything is plastic, and we have the same kind of design here on the coupler. And obviously we have 2 motors that drive the Z-axis with flexible couplers, and same thing on the Sidewinder. So very nice design, seems to be very robust. So here we are on the Genius, we have the optical sensor here for the Y end stop. Here's our motor with the belt. Same thing on the Sidewinder, the sensor, the motor, and you can see how much larger this channel is here compared to this one on the Genius. So since this is an AC bed, this needs to be protected very well because this is mains power. They have this pretty nice silicone sleeve here on the Genius, which I really like, and it kind of just goes into the mat. So it's a little different on the Sidewinder. It seems a little bit more crude, and you can kind of tell there, you can see the wires, and then we have a braided cable with wires in it. So it still seems to be pretty safe and okay, but I definitely like that wire on the Genius better. We have exactly the same sockets with the power switch. And here we have the sticker of all the technical aspects of the printer. So this is the Sidewinder, and this is the Genius. And as you can see, guys, they're both good for PLA and TPU, which makes them really nice. And on the very bottom, we can see we have nice rubber feet on both of the printers. So for the next part, let's go ahead and power on the printer. So this is the Genius. And there we see the logo. And it's a pretty quick load up time. And the idle sound is quite quiet. So the fan is running, but it's very subdued. So now let's go ahead and turn on the Sidewinder. And as you can see, guys, it's pretty much the same kind of boot up and load. So they're using exactly the same software with exactly the same screens to run the programs. So here we are back on the Genius, and one of the things I love about their touch screens is because they're very intuitive, not to mention that they look great. But here you can see we have all the options that we need to control the printer. And the great thing about this touchscreen, it's very responsive. I can go quickly through everything and it's extremely responsive. Let's see if I can do really quick. You guys can see how quick that is. And the Sidewinder is the same. So it's exactly the same thing. So you guys can see how fast this thing can move. So in my book, that's a huge plus, because if you're going to have a touchscreen, it needs to be very responsive. And Artillery has really good software with the amazing response of the screen. All right, so we checked out all the details about the printers. I think we should go ahead and print something out. So we're going to do 2 prints for each printer with the same filament for each print. That way we can compare how close they are, and they also will be sliced with the same file. So I'm going to use Overture as my filament, and it's the PLA Pro, or also known as the PLA Plus, I think. So here we are on the Genius. It's quite simple, so we're just going to put the spool on top here. And you guys can see how easy that spool spins and how free. And that's these bearings here that make it really seamless. So then we're going to go through our filament detector. And then after that, we're going to go into the hot end. And we're going to go ahead and load some filament in the Sidewinder also. Alright, so let's go ahead and get the Genius started. You guys can hear how loud it is. We're going to click on print. So I'm going to print Calibration Cube on each printer, which will be purple, and then a Benchy on each printer, which will be the blue. So since this printer has the purple, we'll start the Calibration Cube. So here, guys, you can kind of see that our bed is warming up, and it's actually going quite quick because it's an AC bed. So once that gets hot, then we'll have our hot end start. But it's really a quick process. And surprisingly, this doesn't take more than a minute for everything to get going. So we do have a light in there that shines, and you can actually control it from here if you wanted to. Click on more, we can see you can turn it on and off. And you do have some options here while you're printing to do things like change filament, pause, stop, and preheat. And both UIs are exactly the same. Alright, so we're getting really close to getting started, and there we go. And as you guys can hear, it's really quiet, even on the movements. So we're purging right now. And now our print will start. Okay, I just realized that this is actually not just a calibration cube, this is something else I printed before. So I'm gonna have to restart that with just a calibration cube. But as you guys can hear, it's very, very quiet. Let me just bring my microphone to it. So I mean, there's basically no sound. It's ultra quiet. Now when this fan does come on, it gets, you know, a little louder, but it's all fan noise. But as far as the printer itself, it's very pleasant to be around and watch it print because of how quiet it is. So I'm gonna go ahead and stop that print, and I'm gonna restart it in a second. But let's go ahead and start the Sidewinder here to print the Benchy. So obviously we have the same options as we saw there. Let's see how fast the bed will warm up to 60. So it's doing a great job, and keep in mind this is a large surface area to heat up. We're talking about 300 by 300. So this printer does take a little bit longer, but it's not much. All right, and so there goes our Benchy. Well, it looks like we got a really good start there. The bed is perfectly leveled, and you guys can hear how quiet that printer is. And for some reason our axial fan here is on the first layer, which is not right. I think I probably need to like hold that for a second. So you definitely don't want your cooling fan on the first layer. So yeah, guys, as you can see, we started the Benchy, and we're just gonna let it print, and then we're gonna print the same Benchy with the same file on the Genius. And I don't know if you guys can tell, but both of the printers are on, and all the fans are on, and it's very quiet. I'm gonna bring my microphone here right up to me. So the Sidewinder does seem to be a little bit louder, and I think it's mostly because of this axial fan. If I stop that, they're practically the same. So the fan on the Sidewinder is a little bit louder. Maybe that fan is an older version or just not as good as the one on the Genius. But as far as how quiet they are, they're both very quiet. But the Genius is being a little bit quieter because of that better axial fan. Very quiet machines. Alright, so both of the printers are done. Let's go to the Sidewinder. So the Sidewinder printed us a nice looking Benchy, and this should just pop right off. It is stuck on there pretty good, but if I pull on it just a little, it pops right off. And that's what makes this ultra base bed very convenient and quite easy to use. Now the only issue with it is that if you do have a power outage and your bed cools or you run out of filament, there's a possibility that your print might pop off. But if you don't touch it, most of the time when it reheats, it'll grab it. So the bed is an absolute plus. So here on the Genius, we have the Calibration Cube, which pretty much is already broken off. And so you can see how easy things just come right off. All right, so we got a calibration cube for the Genius. So now the Genius needs to print a Benchy and the Sidewinder needs to print a calibration cube. All right, so I got both printers ready to go. All I gotta do is push confirm. I'm kind of curious which printer will start first. So let's confirm and see which one will go first. I'm guessing the Genius will probably beat out the Sidewinder. Surprisingly, the Sidewinder is ahead right now. So we got 50 on the Genius. Okay, so the Genius is definitely caught up and beat it. So it just now hit 50 on the Sidewinder, and we're already at almost 60 on the Genius. So the Genius hit the 60. It should start warming up the hot end. So the hot end is preheating quite quick. Okay, so the Sidewinders cheated a little bit because we have 55 here. Didn't realize that was different. But we do have 215 on here and 210 on here. So maybe that's pretty close. And it's quite impressive that the Sidewinder can pick up that much speed with its large bed. Okay, there we go. So the Genius started first. Sidewinder should start any second. There we go. So it's not behind very much. So even if the bed was a little bit higher, it might have took a little bit longer, but we were 5 degrees over on the hot end on the Sidewinder. So both of the printers are printing and everything looks good. So once they're done, we're gonna take a closer look at the models, and then I'll give you my opinion on what printer I think is a better value and which one I would choose if I had to, have only one printer. All right, so the Sidewinder has been done with the little cube, and the Genius is almost done with the Benchy. So this is gonna be our second set, and we're gonna take a closer look at it in a second. There we go, so it actually finished. So let's go to the Genius here. Actually, I'm gonna let this cool down because it pops off a lot easier when it's cool. Since this finished a while back, it's cold, and see how easy this comes off? Really easy, guys. I mean, I just barely touched it and it pops right off. So I can already tell that I think I was too close to the bed on this thing. There's a little bit of an elephant foot here, but we're gonna take a closer look at it. Yeah, that was definitely too close. Such a thin film. But you can see how easy even something this thin comes off this bed. Very cool. All right, so the bed is still warm, but let's go ahead and try to take this off. It should come off. Okay, it still comes off pretty easy. Oh wow, this Benchy turned out really good. And just at a first glance, I'm pretty sure it turned out better than the Sidewinder because the Sidewinder had an issue that I noticed after it finished. All right, so let's start with the Benchies. This is the Genius Benchy, and here we have the Sidewinder Benchy. Now the Sidewinder Benchy had a little bit of an issue. You can see here up front, there's like a little rough spot, and the reason it has that is because the tip over here lifted off the bed just a little bit when I was printing, and when it lifts, it creates this little rash here in the front. And even though you saw how close we are to the nozzle on the Sidewinder, the bed doesn't stick as good as the Genius bed. And I think it has to do something with this matte finish. So for sure, I've noticed that the Genius bed does stick better. But remember, my Sidewinder is quite old. And if you'd buy a Sidewinder now, most likely would probably use the newer bed that's more matte. And you guys can kind of see they're pretty much identical in the reflections. So the Sidewinder's on this side. So I can't tell really a huge difference between them two. Maybe the Genius is a tiny bit better, but very tiny if it's any. So here we can see on the backs, hopefully you guys can see that. They pretty much look identical, no matter where you turn them. So overall, a great solid print. If you get prints like this out of your 3D printer, this is considered pretty good in my book, because if you look at the side here, you can see on the reflection how good the light goes. And the lines you see in the filament there, that's just shadows reflecting. They're not actually there, if that makes any sense. So if I turn it like this, you can see that they're not there. So because this filament is semi-transparent, the way the light hits it kind of shows you some layering. But overall, guys, you can see even the roof here with the chimney turned out perfect. And you can kind of make out the lettering, sort of. It's about average or above average compared to most 3D printers. So yeah, both printers pretty much have the same quality because they have the same hot end and extruder and all the electronics that control the movements. All right, so let's look at cubes next. So here we have a cube from the Sidewinder, and here we have the cube from the Genius. So I'm going to put them together so we can see a little better. Hopefully we can see that. You can see maybe, well, they look pretty close. But I would say the Genius did a tiny bit better, ever so slightly. It's not almost noticeable. And I think that has something to do maybe with the bed also, because the bed is smaller on the Genius, has less artifacting, especially in the corners here. You can see on the Sidewinder on the very corner, there's like a little bit more, I guess, I don't know what you would call it, overshooting. But it's ever so slightly, you can't even tell. They're practically the same. So there's a little bit more layering maybe in the Sidewinder. Well, actually, I don't know. Like I said, they're extremely close. So here's the flat ends that have no patterns in them. Pretty darn same. Now let's look at the top real quick. And they both look pretty much identical. So yeah guys, as you can see, the two printers are very identical to each other. They have so much similarities that they pretty much print exactly the same. So it really comes down to what you want and, you know, how much space you have, because the Sidewinder is quite a large printer and you definitely, you know, would need some room for that. The Genius is more friendly and that it's more compact and seems to be a little bit more refined. Me personally, I gravitate towards the Sidewinder, and the reason why is because it just gives you so much options with this large bed and the 400 height of printing. You know, you can pretty much print anything on this printer, and then, you know, even huge things you can print in pieces and put them together. And obviously you can do that with the Genius, but you are more limited with the size for sure. Now, if you're starting out and huge printer kind of intimidates you, then the Genius is probably a better choice. And because the Genius is pretty much a smaller version of the Sidewinder, it's not priced much cheaper than the Sidewinder, which makes it a little harder to choose, you know, if you wanted the best bang for your buck. Now, if you're more on a budget and you still want this kind of printer, then the Genius definitely makes more sense. But I would still recommend the Sidewinder. I think it delivers a lot more value for the money. But with that said, both of these printers have so much going for them. They pretty much have everything you want in a printer. Alright guys, well hopefully you enjoyed this video of the comparisons between the Sidewinder and the Genius. If you want to see more about these printers, I do have individual unboxing and reviews of both of them. So there'll be some links at the end of the video, so check those out. And if you're interested in purchasing one of these for yourself, so also I'll have some links in the description for that. And if you enjoy videos like this and you want to see more comparison videos, then let me know in the comments. And also, if you're not subscribed to this channel, I do a lot of 3D printing reviews, and there's a lot more to come. So hit that subscribe button if you're not subscribed. And as always guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace.